What's going on, people? Today's video I'm doing a test. I conducted a test on S30V versus ELMAX. Now I know ELMAX is something that not too many people come across as a blade steel unless they were get into things like microtech knives and are into auto knives, or also like the fixed blades like the Barker River knives. But other than that, it's not really outside of those companies, ELMAX isn't really a steel that you see in many other places. Like for example, this model in ELMAX is a Tony Marfione custom ANAX. That's the name, ANAX. So, and anybody who knows Tony Marfione was the creator of microtech knives. But then, of course, he also has custom pieces, and from there, usually called Marfione customs. And the knife on top, that's an S30V. Everybody knows this model. It's the Spyderco Shaman. And yeah. So I figure these two, of course this one with the shoulder ground down a bit, these two have a close enough BTE similarity, like behind the edge thickness, and I figured, hell, why not? ELMAX isn't really seen as like a super performer, but it is something that's a step ahead of S30V. And one thing to note too is that S30V and ELMAX are a worker's steel. It's a workman's kind of steel. It's not that kind of steel. These aren't the kind of steels that you would want to put in like a super high polish, because if you're doing like day-to-day like cardboard cutting, day-to-day rope cutting and stuff like that, and you put a high polish on either one of these, they tend to lose their super high-end sharpness fairly quickly in those day-to-day common tasks with abrasive materials. Usually with softer materials you can get away with giving them a more refined high polish finish, or if you're not cutting cardboard or things like rope that often, or plastics that often, then yeah, you can most certainly put these in a super high polish and then be fine with it. But yeah, so for the test, what I did was, since these are high carbide stainless steels, the way they break down is, at the pinnacle of the apex you have teeth, and what happens is those teeth start to break apart. That's how these high carbide stainless steels work. That's how the edge breaks down, is it breaks apart. Whereas if we were talking about tool steels, the teeth just bend and flex until they're too weak to continue, and then finally break off. So I figured, with that being said, what I was going to do for sharpening these steels, what I ended up doing was putting not a refined edge. Basically, what I did was I simply had my Edge Pro Apex with the Spyderco diamond rod fashioned onto the rod. So did that. After removing metal with the Spyderco diamond rod, I didn't touch it with anything else. I just simply went to a strop that was loaded with 28 micron diamond paste and let it rip. This way I could do the testing with just the carbides, all the carbides hanging out nice, raw, and jagged. So without further ado, I'm gonna go take us to the testing footage. So as I mentioned in the earlier segment, I sharpened both of these with just simply using the Spyderco diamond sharp maker rod, and then finish them off by stropping them on a piece of leather loaded with 28 micron diamond compound. Now, the reason why I believe that this test made sense was because In terms of carbon, ELMAX has 1.7% carbon, whereas S30V carries 1.45 to 1.46% carbon. In terms of chromium, ELMAX carries 18% chromium, and S30V carries 14%. And from there, in terms of vanadium, ELMAX carries 3%, whereas CPM S30V has 1% higher than it, carrying 4%. Then we get to the molybdenum. S30V carries 2%, whereas ELMAX is 1% in terms of molybdenum. And then, of course, ELMAX has 0% tungsten, whereas S30V carries between 0.1% to 0.4%. And then the rest of the results are minuscule differences here and there with the other composites within both steels. So, given the amount of carbon and chromium that ELMAX carries over S30V, while being neglected the minute amount of tungsten and less vanadium and less molybdenum than S30V, I figured, you know what, ELMAX should be a step up above S30V. But one thing these two steels have in common is that they're high carbide, high alloy steels. Or in a more particular category, high carbide stainless steels. So sharpening them with a coarse diamond rod, and here you see me now switching the testing to the Marfion and Axon ELMAX steel. But yeah, putting them on the opposite end of the spectrum, whereas usually whenever I have steels like 4V or M4 sharpened to a high polish, having them on the opposite ends actually gives it the ability to have all those carbides sitting on the outside, out in the open, poking out. And yeah, these two being worker steels, that's what they're made to do. They're made to be put through some serious work. So yes, of course, for that much carbides, you would definitely want to have the carbides, well pronounced, so then they could actually go through fibrous materials as well as going through more denser materials such as cardboard. But at the same time, you'll see it go through things like shrink wrap. The carbides, the teeth on the apex will just grab onto the shrink wrap, as opposed to like a more polished edge. You would have to kind of bunch up the fibrous material, such as like shrink wrap or like pieces of cloth, bunch them up or tighten them enough so that the edge will actually go through it. But yes, going through this test, it was actually pretty interesting to see how far ahead ELMAX will go through. And another reason why I wanted to put this test up was because there is a few people that are kind of curious about, how well does ELMAX perform? And if you look at the history of people doing video on ELMAX, not too many of them, well, it's kind of polarizing in a sense, because some people say, oh yeah, it performs great, and then, other people on the other end says, oh, it performs poorly. But just as well, the same could be said with S30V. S30V has had a bad history, being sitting on the poor end of the heat treat. But anyways, we're going to get back up top. I'm going to finish this. So, we're back up top. And before I read the results, full disclosure, the results that I get on my knife tests, even if you had the exact same knives, will vary depending on how the person sharpens, what they use for their sharpening tools, what they cut, how they cut it, as well as many other variables. But yes, going to the test results, S30V has made a total of 310 cuts, and that totaled up to 250 feet worth of cardboard cutting. So 310 cuts, 250 feet of cardboard. For ELMAX cut made 330 cuts and totaled at 293.25 feet. So we'll just round it off to an even 293. So that means it did roughly 15% better than S30V. 250 feet, 293. So that being said, these results coming from two steels that have a very polarizing past. Some people like them, some people don't. Some people have had great results with them. Some people have flat out come to a point where, you know, they'd just be better off with something like VG10. You know, less cutting capability, but easier to sharpen. But yeah, there you have it. With my testing, now you get some numbers that can give you a general idea that these two steels actually perform very well. You know, if you think about it, like outside of the knife community, there's a lot of knife users out there that have nothing to do with the knife community. They just use knives in general. And to get knives that, you know, can cut to that degree, they'll be happier than anything out there. And yeah, these are, you know, putting them in the progression, in the grit progression that I did, makes them perfect slicers and perfect draw cutters. They're having such a toothy edge makes it very grabby when it comes to the material. They almost react similar to a serrated edge, but without seeing actual serrations. And yeah, that being said, that's my testing, and y'all take it easy, and I'm out.